Good evening, Westport. How are we doing tonight? Okay, I like the sound of that. Welcome to the Malloy Lecture in the Arts. I'm Bill Harmer, the Executive Director of the Westport Library. Thanks to the generosity of the late Susan Malloy, the Malloy Lecture in the Arts has enabled the Westport Library to bring some extraordinary talent to Westport since 2002. The Malloy Lecture aims to highlight individuals whose work has significantly influenced and changed our appreciation of the arts for audiences of all ages. Past programs have included distinguished playwright Arthur Miller, musician Joshua Bell and Frederick Chu, author Joyce Carol Oates, actor Christopher Plummer, music legend Clive Davis, author Salman Rushdie, and Broadway star Kelly O'Hara, and tonight we are very honored to add Richard Butler to that list. Richard Butler rose to international fame with the Psychedelic Furs, with the Furs emerging as one of London's leading post-punk bands in the late 1970s. Their self-titled debut, produced by VersoFest 2023 keynote speaker Steve Lillywhite, who's in the house, was top 20 on the UK album charts, and their run of success continued with 6 subsequent albums released between 1981 and 1991, including Mirror Moves, Forever Now, and Talk, Talk, Talk. While perhaps best known as the singer and founder of the Psychedelic Furs, Butler's painting career began well before his music career did, while he was still a student at Epsom Art School. He created the artwork for the Psychedelic Furs' early gigs and had strong influence on the album art and visual direction of the band. Throughout the 1980s, when the band achieved worldwide success and toured wildly, Butler put his painting on the back burner. It was only after the band took an extended hiatus in the early 1990s that he returned to his first love. Since then, he's kept at it and has managed to balance both endeavors. He has continued to create music with several side projects. He and his brother Tim and bandmate in the Furs went on to form Love Spit Love, and the reconfigured Furs started touring again in 2001. But incredibly, it took nearly 30 years for the band to get together and release a new studio album. And that came out in 2020 with the symphonic Made of Rain, earning rave reviews in comparisons to their best work. And although the band continues to tour extensively, so has Butler's work as a painter continued, having launched exhibitions in New York, Los Angeles, Miami, London, Berlin, and other prestigious galleries all over the world. Tonight, Richard Butler will be joined in conversation with famed American musician and producer, Mr. Chris Frantz. Chris was the drummer for both the Talking Heads and the Tom Tom Club, which he co-founded with his wife and Talking Heads bassist Tina Weymouth, who's also in the house. In July 2020, Chris released an exceptional autobiography called Remain in Love, and I strongly suggest that you seek that out if you haven't read it. In 2002, he was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as a member of the Talking Heads. He is a longtime resident of Fairfield, Connecticut. He's been a programmer at WPKN for a number of years now, and he gives so much back to this community, and we're so blessed to have him here steering the conversation with Mr. Butler tonight. Let's welcome him to the stage.
Thank you all. Welcome, Richard.
Thank you, Chris.
It's a great pleasure for me to converse with you this evening. How's everybody? Good, good. So, you know, your background and your family background is very interesting to me. Your father was a scientist and something of a political activist, I think.
A communist. That's
And
not considered an activist in England.
and your mother was an artist.
Yes.
What type of artist was she? Was she a painter or a
A
sculptor?
painter, yeah, but
Painter.
still lifes and stuff like that. Not, you know. I mean, a hero was Chardin. You know, it's
Oh, cool.
not very adventurous, really, but a painter nonetheless.
Cool. Were you and your family proper bohemians?
I never thought of us as being such, but we probably were. You know, I mean, yes, I suppose we were.
I figured you might
How
be.
would you define a bohemian?
Well, someone who is kind of outside of conventional values and mores. Somebody who thinks that art is more important than commerce.
Yes, then.
Cool. I thought so. And
And a family that drinks too much, probably.
tell me what it was like growing up in Kingston upon Thames in southwest London.
I'd love to tell you that, Chris, but I didn't grow up in Kingston upon Thames.
Oh, where did you grow up?
But, you know, for the people that did grow up there, I imagine it was wonderful.
Where did you grow up then?
Sorry.
Surrey, just like Steve Lillywhite.
Was he from Surrey?
Yes. Okay. Very nice. Was it drawing and painting that interested you before music, or did they sort of go hand in hand?
They went hand in hand, I think. When I was growing up, my father used to listen to a lot of blues, a lot of Bob Dylan. Music was always being played around the house, but, you know, my mother was always painting still lifes as well. So, yeah, I grew up with both, I suppose, you know. I was very, very interested in music and very interested in Bob Dylan, Muddy Waters, you know, the whole blues thing, Woody Guthrie, all sorts of stuff. You know.
Interesting.
Edith Piaf as well.
Oh, good. Excellent. It seems that many British rockers, such as yourself, went to art school. How did the opportunity to study painting come to you as a young man?
Like many British rockers, I didn't want to get a job. And it seemed like a kind of buffer between school and the world, I suppose, and something you could, you know, if you had an inkling of talent, you could escape, you know, getting a job, a real job. So I think it was for that reason, probably. Being a lazy bastard, really.
Who are the people that most influenced you as an artist, painting-wise?
Influences, you know, as an artist and as a musician vary as you know, age. You know, I think what you see as a hero when you're 17, 18 is very different to when you're 27 or 28, or when you're 30 or 40. It changes, and, you know, your taste either, you know, matures or kind of, you know, becomes redundant. It is a question of taste. It changes. I mean, you know, for example, when I was in my teens and early 20s at art school, I thought Andy Warhol was fantastic because he changed what we could consider to be art, and I loved the revolution of it, you know. Now I go to the, you know, Andy Warhol Museum in Pittsburgh, and I find it somewhat lacking in a lot of ways. I mean, I think I appreciated the scene and the factory and the Velvet Underground and all this the vibe around it more than I ever actually appreciated the work. And when you see the work in isolation, it was very dependent on that vibe, I think.
Your paintings, as we can see behind us, they
Not,
but not at the
that
moment.
isn't one of mine.
Here's one right now. They have strange, kind of dreamlike images. To you, are these images scary sometimes? Do these images come to you in your dreams?
No, not at all. I don't find them scary either. I work on paintings. I work on photographs mainly, and then I work on the photographs in Facebook. And when not Facebook. Thank you. Photoshop. I take photographs until I love them. Then I work on until I'm pleased with it, and then I turn it into a painting and use that as the rough beginning of a painting. And I just work on it until it feels right, until it reflects back something about me. It echoes somehow. And I don't try and do something that's scary, or don't try and do something that's weird. I'm not being that self-conscious about what I'm doing. It's just until I just do something until it feels right. And the same goes for writing lyrics. It's you start with, you'll write out a verse, and then you'll say, this verse doesn't work because this line is awful, or it doesn't feel right, it feels awkward. But once you get the initial verse written down, then you can correct it. I love correcting. I don't like writing the original verse, but I'm very good at correcting what I've done. And that's the part where I'm working from something that's not a blank canvas. I'm actually focusing in on something. Does that make any sense at all?
It does.
Okay.
Okay, you are very well known as the frontman of the Psychedelic Furs, but your artistic pursuits were first as a painter long before you made your first record. What made you decide to put down the paintbrush and pick up music? And at what age did you take up the guitar, and were lessons involved?
No lessons. I really wanted to be a painter, but I'd always loved music. And when I was at art school, I was always doing a painting and saying, how can I make this? At that time, I was very into, like Roxy Music, the New York Dolls, the Velvet Underground, Bob Dylan still. And I was thinking, how can I paint something that gives me that feeling of what these artists are doing? And of course, you can't really. But I still loved the, painting and making images. And so I left art school, and I tried to get my work out to galleries, and I thought, what do you do from here? How do you leave college with a degree in fine art and get to be in a gallery? And I couldn't figure out a way. But around that time, punk rock sort of happened, and I started going down to these shows, and I saw the Sex Pistols at the 100 Club, and I'd never seen any energy and anger like that. And it was a time, as Steve knows, that music was exploding, and things were changing, and record companies were turned upside down, because what traditionally was good music had no value anymore. It was more about what you could project, and the feeling you could project. And that, I thought, I could try that, I could do that. And so I gave it a go, and it worked fairly well. Thanks partly to this young man here, who a lot of you saw earlier on, I think.
What a coincidence that you're both here tonight.
I know.
Steve Lillywhite is in the audience, and he produced your first 2 albums, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Good job. So the punk new wave explosion in England was really exciting. I mean, with our band Talking Heads, we got to go there in the spring of '77, and we met the Clash, and we met the Slits, and we met a couple of we met Sid Vicious. Tina met Sid
good
Vicious,
Lord.
and they were all like really nice kids, But the punk explosion in England, it was really phenomenal, wasn't it? And I think there was a real art to it that.
Well, it was all, we basically stole it from America. It's like the British have always been great at stealing things from America, packaging them, and then sending them back, like the Beatles, and people like this.
Right.
And of course,
Right.
The English thing about, ripped up clothing and safety pins was Richard Hell was doing
That's
that,
right.
and the spiky haircut and all sorts of stuff. I mean, the scene really started in New York, I think. I always thought the Sex Pistols sounded like the New York Dolls with the Cockney singer.
Yes. Yes, it's true that it probably began in New York, but when we went to England, we noticed that, man, people are really, it was in all the newspapers and on TV.
It's a tiny country, isn't it?
Well, we did notice that it seemed to be like the same 50 or 60 kids that were in every video and in every photograph. And yeah. Let's see. Well, speaking of punk and new wave, which were the punk and new wave bands that excited you the most, that you felt were like really, really something?
Well, I mean, I liked a lot of Eddie and the Hot Rods, funnily enough. Were immediately before punk, but I thought they were great. I saw them live and they had this energy. The same with Wilco Johnson and Lee Brillo. And, Wilco Johnson played like nobody I'd seen play before, and that energy on stage, but that all just came just previous to punk rock in England. And, I went to see the Sex Pistols at the 100 Club, and I'd never seen that much venom and anger and a palpable feeling of danger being in the audience. It was... The adrenaline was incredible, and I really, really liked that. And of course, when we toured America, we toured with Your Good Self, and that, Remain in Light tour was eye-opening. I mean, there was a lot of great music coming out at that time.
Yes, indeed. Okay, this is a long question.
Oh, Jesus.
In 1976, Punk Magazine issue number 2, my wife Tina was famously quoted as saying, "We have no heroes." And that was taken up as a kind of anthem by the Sex Pistols, who started after they saw the Ramones on their first tour of the UK. The Psychedelic Furs, however, seem to have a far more classic approach to music than the Pistols or the Clash. Was that because you already knew how to play, or were you possibly punk in your early configurations? Did you or did you not have heroes? And who were the most influential on your playing and your songwriting?
Oh, good Lord.
That's a hard one.
I'm trying to remember the beginning of the question. Heroes, I suppose. I would say the Velvet Underground were certainly heroes. John Cale, Lou Reed. Bob Dylan was still a hero, and, punk rock came along. It's like Pol Pot, they were trying to start at the year zero, pretending to start at the year zero, though, like I said before, the Sex Pistols sounded like the New York Dolls.
Yeah.
So it was clear that, you know, they had their heroes, whether they would admit it or not. You know, everybody builds on something, you know. So yeah, you know, Roxy Music, Velvet Underground, Bob Dylan, people like that were my heroes, I would say.
All right. This is a question from my son, Egan, who's a painter. And,
Uh-oh.
yeah, he's doing all right. But he asks, or says, painting is a solitary act, quite the opposite of working with a band, which is collaborative by nature. Most people find solitary work can become difficult after the initial sense of freedom wears off. There must be an upside, though. Many painters live to a ripe old age and never retire. What do you find to be the benefits of working alone?
Well, I would say, for one thing, that writing songs isn't entirely collaborative, because some fool has to go away and write the lyrics to the things, you know, and that tends to be quite an individual thing that you have to do. I mean, I would hate to be a writer, you know. I mean, that spends hours of self-examination, you know, and it's all mental, you know. Painting, I love, you know, I mean, that is an individual occupation, but I mean, it is somewhat physical as well. So, you know, it's not just entirely in your head. Did that answer the question? So I forget what the details of the question. Okay.
He was just saying, he was wondering, do you find it difficult sometimes when you're all alone with your easel and your canvas?
Not at all. No, not at all. No.
You don't have moments of desperation?
I do, and then my lovely wife's always up at the house making a cup of tea, so I always go up there and join her.
That's great. Are there any contemporary painters today that you're particularly fond of? You mentioned Julian Schnabel. The other.
I respect Julian in a lot of ways. He's not one of my favorite painters per se. Michael Boromans is somebody that I really like. There are lots of figurative painters that I look at and like. None that I, you know, adore. But, you know, probably closest would be Michael Boromans, I suppose.
Okay. I don't know him. I'm going to have to check him out.
There's Adrian Guiney as well, who does some fantastic work. Very Francis Bacon influenced to his detriment in a way, but, you know, he does get away from that a lot.
Okay.
Neo Rauch is another one, actually. He's good. Or Rauch, however you pronounce it.
So I remember meeting you for the first time at the Orpheum Theater in Boston, Massachusetts, in 1980, when the Psychedelic Furs played with the Talking Heads. Was that your first visit to the USA?
It was the end of our first tour, and we wanted to go home. And then we were doing quite well, because, you know, I mean, we were traveling around in a little van, and we were doing all these college radio interviews and just working so hard, you know, working really hard under very testing conditions. And then at the end of the tour, the record company said, well, you're doing quite well. You know, you're getting played on college radio. Would you like to do these dates with Talking Heads? And we said, only if we can have a tour bus and we can bring our girlfriends over. And so they said, yeah, all right. So that's kind of what happened. We had a tour bus, you know. My girlfriend came over and promptly left, and we did the tour.
I don't think we had a tour bus. In fact, I'm sure of it. So your band was experiencing tremendous success in the States, and eventually you moved here. Was there any Was there any particular reason you initially made that move?
Yes, I suppose. I mean, America's a big country, and we could tour a lot here.
Yeah.
And you know, we'd already started getting, you know, decent crowds, albeit, you know, club and small theatre crowds, but we could do fairly well over here. And it was an adventure. It was a new place. You know, it was a very exciting country to be in. And, you know, going back to, you know, rainy London, you know, it didn't seem that appealing. And we'd just actually done a record in Woodstock with Todd Rundgren. And we kind of liked it over here. So we just decided to move over.
Tell me about your experience with Todd Rundgren. Was it positive?
Yes.
As a producer?
Very positive. Yeah, a lot of people have said, well, a lot of people, specifically Andy Partridge from XTC, a lot of Andy said that it was a horrible experience, and it absolutely wasn't. It was a fantastic experience. You know?
Yeah.
He brought a lot of ideas to us. We didn't want to have backing vocals at all, and he brought in Flo and Eddie from the Turtles, who had worked with Frank Zappa and Mark Bolan.
Right.
And he brought them in, and we were still kind of a kind of punk rock, do-it-yourself aesthetic. You know, we weren't sure whether we wanted professionals, you know, involved. And he said, if you don't like it, you know, I promise you we'll take it off. And it turned out to be, sounded great, so we just kept it on. You know.
Those guys can sing.
Yeah.
Steve Lillywhite said that you guys were very loose in the studio. The Psychedelic
In what
Furs.
way?
Well, he wasn't too specific.
He wasn't too specific.
He said that in contrast to XTC, who were very, you know, finessed and everything was just so,
Yeah.
the Psychedelic Furs were a little more devil-may-care in their approach.
That's a very polite way of putting it. Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Steve. We couldn't play very well at that point, you know, and we drank a lot. But we were passionate about what we did, you know. And thanks to Steve for guiding us through it. But certainly we weren't, you know, I mean, when I listened to XTC albums or, you know, Peter Gabriel, other acts that Steve did, they're very polished music-wise, very polished and very talented. And we weren't that at that point. You know, our talent didn't lie there. It didn't lie in musicianship. You know, God knows where it lay, but some people recognized it somewhere. You know.
So I believe you're now living not too far from here in a beautiful country spot. And you, do you find that country life suits you and suits you and your work differently than, say, living in a big city?
It's exactly the same. It doesn't affect the work I do at all. Just affects, you know, I mean, it's fantastic to wake up in the morning and just look out at this beautiful scenery, you know,
yes.
Instead of some dirty street. I mean, having said that, I did love my time in New York. It was, you know, I mean, New York, to me, when I moved there, was the most exciting city in the world. You know, you could still go out to clubs, and Andy Warhol was wandering around, and it was, you know, vibrant. And Basquiat was, you know, out at all the clubs. It was the center, artistically, of the world, it seemed. Yeah. You know, now not so much. I don't know. I don't think so.
I completely agree. We moved to New York because Andy Warhol was there,
Yeah.
and Lou Reed, and Rauschenberg,
Yeah.
and I'm trying to think of the conceptual art scene was there. Philip Glass was there.
Yeah.
And Philip Glass is still there, thank goodness. something is kind of, commerce kind of took over. I guess it's the government that regulated things to the point where nightclubs couldn't stay open, and you know what I'm talking about.
Well, yeah, it used to be dangerous. Remember all those like late night clubs, like
Yeah.
that you could be at until 6, 7 in the morning. You know?
Yes.
I don't think you have those anymore, do you? It was...
Not that I know of. Although if we opened one in Westport, it would do really well.
Oh, you should come around my place sometime.
Okay, back to paint. David Bowie, the great artist, once said that he thinks of music as paint. Do you feel that way about music or creating music?
Not at all. No, I don't. I don't even know what that means, to tell you the truth.
Well, I think my impression was that he meant that there's not that big a difference between making a painting and creating a song. In what goes on in the creative process, you know, like colors, textures.
Still making no sense.
Fair enough. So, do you identify as a romantic?
Yes, yes.
Is romance a primary source of inspiration in your songwriting and your painting? There you are.
Failed romance, perhaps, is, yeah. I mean, I don't write love songs. I find love songs, for me, very boring to write, and I can't remember the last time I heard a fantastic love song. They don't move me, they don't touch me in the right place, you know, whereas, you know, failed romance I'm a sucker for every time, so.
Yes.
I mean, how about you? When was the last time you heard a love song that really touched you?
Well,
I mean, we're talking a happy, you know, skipping on flowers, Valentine.
well, there's
love
that song called Big Dick Energy. I like that one.
That's very romantic. Yeah. I've heard that one myself. It brought me to tears.
Is songwriting akin to poetry to you? Do you think of your lyrics as
No,
real poetry?
no.
No?
No, I don't think of any lyricist as a poet per se. You know, I mean, for me, if you look at poetry, you're looking at, you know, at the acme of, if you will, of poetry is somebody like T.S. Eliot. You know, do I think any lyric writers rise to the level of T.S. Eliot? Absolutely not. You know, not even Bob Dylan. You know, Bob Dylan's probably as, you know. There are other writers that do really well. Nick Cave does some fantastic lyrics. Elvis Costello does some fantastic lyrics, you know, but do they rise to the level of a T.S. Eliot or even a Dylan Thomas? No, I don't think they do. Or a Yeats? No, they don't.
So you've read poetry.
Yeah, well, yeah.
You know what the real thing is.
well, maybe.
Andy Warhol said that the best art is good business and that the best business is good art. Some others believe that commerce is the enemy of good art, and some believe that good taste is the greatest enemy of art. What are your thoughts about this?
Well, Andy Warhol also famously said at one point, I think, that, you know, some of the most successful and richest artists are people that you've never heard of. And they're probably people that do public statues and stuff like that. So if great art is great business, then why don't we know their names? I don't know. I think a lot of things that Andy Warhol said were very tongue-in-cheek, you know. Yeah, I don't agree with him.
You don't agree, or you do agree?
I don't agree, no.
When you're working on your paintings, do you work quickly, or is it sometimes more painstaking and lengthy?
I'm very impatient, so I would like to be able to work quicker than I actually do. I've taken these days to working a lot more slowly. And by these days, I mean in the last 2 months. I can't wait to get a canvas covered. A blank canvas is a very scary, raw thing. Oh, good Lord. A blank canvas is a very scary, raw thing. You know, I like to get something on it, then I can start building and correcting it. That's when I feel more comfortable.
Do you do a lot of painting out, like paint something and then paint over it?
Oh, absolutely, all the time,
Yeah.
yeah. In fact, my favorite paintings that I've done are when I make a painting and I don't really care for it, and then I paint over it, and then I leave some, you know, I look back at it and go, oh, there's some of that. I like that mouth from the old one, even though it's not in the right place, you know. I like some of those, you know. Mm-hmm. Pure accident.
So are you, because you're working more slowly now, are you painting it with oil paint?
Always oil.
Always with oil. Yeah, it looks beautiful. Yeah. Okay, here's another long one.
Oh, no.
The band The Clash are famous for getting their clothing look together before they learned to play their instruments or wrote a song. They were quoted by the music press as being proud to walk down the street together as a gang, while they are quoted as saying to each other, "Now we look like a band." Their image as rebellious punks was created before they created their sound. It was only after they put together their look that they began to learn how to play their instruments. They even had a video filmmaker, Don Letts, who was included as a fifth member of the group. You might say their image dictated which subjects they would cover in their songs. For you and the Furs, on the other hand, just how important has clothing and hair been? You did have some good hairdos.
Yeah, I look back on them with horror, actually, in the 80s, some of those. I mean, the big hair 80s were an embarrassing time for many of us, you know. I think I got off quite lightly, actually. Robert Smith, not so lightly. But it wasn't, you know, it wasn't about image to that degree, I don't think, you know, for us.
Okay, as a visual artist, have you ever written a song with an idea relating how the video would look? Does the song come
Never.
first?
Never.
Never.
No.
Okay, that answers that. Would you mind talking about the sacrifices, personal sacrifices, you've had to make over the years to achieve the success you have today?
I don't think I could name any. I think that it's been a fantastic ride, you know, and some sacrifices have been not possibly being at home as much as I would like to have been at some points.
Yeah,
but,
that's one.
But, you know, the reverse of that is, you know, what would my alternative be? I could be working at a real estate agent's or in a bank or something, and, you know, how much time do you get at home then, you know? I think it's a very luxurious job, what you and I have done. You know, we've been our own bosses. We've, in a way, kept our own hours, and done what we love. So, for me to be complaining about that would be ridiculous, I think. It's been a fantastic ride, and still is.
You bet. Okay, what are some of your favorite touring memories or concert memories? Most exciting?
Absolutely, with the Talking Heads in.
And you were kind enough to return the favor, and Tom Tom Club supported your band. That was fun.
My favorite memories are I think the places I've got to see, and just performing in front of an audience and getting that immediate response and enthusiasm for an audience that creates this feedback that energizes you yourself. There's nothing like that feeling. It's incredible. Individual places I don't really think about, just the amount of traveling I've been able to do and the amount of places I've been able to see, and having that feedback is the big thing about musical touring. What would you say? I mean,
well, I get very excited, like for example, the first time I went to Paris and we performed, or the first time I went to.
Did you do the Olympia?
No, we did the Bataclan.
Oh, well, I did that one too.
Yeah. We never played the Olympia, I regret to say.
I remember doing the Olympia and thinking, Edith Piaf walked this
Yeah.
stage.
Yeah. And many others.
Yeah.
James Brown. Tell us about the band Love Spit Love, which you made in 1994. Dave Jordan, who engineered and mixed Remain in Light for Talking Heads, also worked with you on that album. Do you have a favorite engineer? And what are the qualities you look for in an engineer?
Oh, good Lord. Engineer?
Well, some of them are more experimental.
I would have to say, Steve Lillywhite was a producer engineer, both. And he's probably the best I've worked with, I would imagine. You owe me money for that.
So, how important do you think it is a college-level art or music education to an artist starting out today? And do you have any specific advice for a young artist starting out today?
I would say a college education in art means absolutely nothing. What advice I would have? Follow what you love. I mean, look at it. I mean, if you're a painter, look through the entire pantheon of art and look at the things that you love and affect you, and then use those as a base to create your own stuff. Originality is a very strange thing. It's a very Western concept, I mean, it didn't apply in the Renaissance. It doesn't apply in, Chinese, Japanese ancient art. You always built on the, on the back of masters. And though people these days claim that, originality is the be-all and end-all, it really isn't, because they're building on past masters too. So don't worry about originality. If you follow your own, direction and your own loves, you will find an originality.
I'd say you found it.
Oh, Jesus.
One thing that, I've said this before, but one thing that was instilled in us when Tina and I, for example, when we went to art school, was that it's okay to be influenced by the greats that came before you. But to be taken seriously as an artist, you have to really dig down and reveal something to the viewer, to your audience, that is unique unto yourself. Otherwise, you're just a copycat, you know?
Yeah.
You agree with me on that?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So,
But you have to start from somewhere. I mean, nothing comes out, you know, you don't start, you know, all the artists we look at as, you know, originals, you know, they came out of somewhere. They had influence when they started. They had influences and built on them and, you know, eventually branched off on their own and, you know, proceeded to follow their own heart. But you have to have a basis of some kind, I think. You know. It doesn't, you don't come out, you know, like Jackson Pollock's just splashing paint on canvas. You know, you work up to that, you know, through, I mean, Jackson Pollock was a big Picasso fan for a while, and then he did those weird cutout things, and then, you know, it built up to that. The same with Mark Rothko, you know, I mean, all of these artists, you know, they built up out of a base of influence, basically.
right. Well, how fortunate are we that we can paint, write, and make music, and people actually recognize and appreciate it.
Very lucky.
I'd say so, and congratulations on the Susan Malloy Award.
Oh, well,
Richard Butler. Are we taking questions from the audience this evening?
We have time for a few questions. So if anybody in the audience has a question, please come on up and use this microphone so that we can all hear you. I think we have time for about 3 questions.
Hello, this is great. You know, you've had this wonderful career of both music, painting, writing, and many other things. And there's a famous American artist named Edward Hopper who once said, if you could say it in words, there'd be no reason to paint. But you've been able to say it in words and in painting, and your layers of your painting and the layers of your lyrics are fascinating. So, but my question is, are there different points in your career that you've looked to that inspiration through words and through the paintbrush? And you can have a short answer.
Did you understand that question?
Well, we couldn't hear the first part, but now they turn on the monitor. Would you mind repeating it just one time quickly?
So the question, there's a quote that I was referring to. If you could say it in words, there'd be no reason to paint, which was by Edward Hopper. You've had the ability to both paint and say it in words. So at what point in your career do you find that inspiration from the words, and do you find it from the paintbrush?
It's a very strange thing. I'm not trying to say something in a painting what I would say in words, and I'm not trying to say in words what I would say in a painting. What you tend to do is, with both, you're reaching for a certain feeling inside of yourself where something reflects back your own, in my case, largely melancholy, and you're waiting for it to speak back to you, whether it be words or painting. And I don't set out to make a song saying something specific, or likewise a painting. You know, it just you wait till it reaches that same place. Does that answer the question? Thanks.
Furs, Psychedelic Furs. How'd you come up with that name, and were there 2 or 3 other names before that might have been the Psychedelic Furs?
Yeah, we were called RKO Radio for a while, the Europeans for a little while. But in England, at the time that punk rock took off, everybody was called things like The Clash, the Sex Pistols, Venus and the Razorblades, the Stranglers, and it was all this violence, and we thought, and you would read these lists of names in the back of Melody Maker, and we thought, what can we do that will make people think, what the fuck are they doing? And we thought, it was ideal to stick psychedelic in front of something, so that's what we did.
Hi there, I have a two-parter, if you don't mind, very quickly. First, I was wondering, how was it working with your brother and balancing the personal and the professional aspect of it? And secondly, I was curious, I last saw you at Cruel World last year, and I know there are a lot of other bands that were playing with you. Just curious if you have any stories to tell of interactions with either Johnny Lydon or Richard Blondie or Richard Murphy. I'd be curious about that.
As for the first
Peter
part,
Murphy.
As for the first part, working with my brother Tim has always been easy. I mean, he contributes a great deal to the writing process, and we both see eye to eye. And you know, he's my brother. I love him, and so we don't have a great deal of arguments. As regards, you know, things like Cruel World Festival and things like that, they're very. It's not the backstage palling around that you imagine things like that might be. It's very, you know, everybody has their own little Winnebago or whatever it is, and you tend to be very concerned with your own friends and who you've invited and what you have to do and the show that you have to do. And then, you know, there's not a great deal of partying or hanging out afterwards, you know. Especially not with John Lydon.
To me, you have one of the greatest and distinctive voices in all of rock. I just love your voice. How did you get this voice? Were you trained? Did Steve bring it out of you? How did you find out that you had such a great voice?
Well, I'll answer the end of that question first. I don't think I have a great voice. It's just my voice. But, you know,
Were you trained?
it's when I push my voice to a certain range, it automatically gets croaky. Nobody brought that voice out in me. It's just always been my voice. One thing that Steve did was when we were a kind of a new wave punk rocky influenced band, you know, I remember doing Sister Europe and singing it full voiced, and Steve said, no, imagine that you're on the phone with your girlfriend and it's late at night, and try and sing it with that kind of voice. And that was a change, and that was a different way of looking at the way you could sing.
Right.
You know, it's just putting yourself in a different position. But as for the timbre or tone of my voice, it's just natural. It's just what it is.
Thank you.
Thank you on behalf of the Westport Library and all of Westport. Thank you both so much for this wonderful, wonderful evening. One more round of applause, everybody.
Thank you all so much.
Congratulations, Richard.
Thank you all for coming tonight.